Good morning. Hello, everyone. Thank you.
And thanks for joining us today. We're really looking forward to this presentation.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too. I've been thinking about this presentation for a while now, and so it's kind of fun to finally be able to bring it to fruition. Karen mentioned my credentials, and what I always like to add on to that is what my credentials show you is that I am very much a lifelong learner, and you're really going to see that in your presentation. You're going to see how I feel it's very important that all of us today are constantly learning, that we learn not only about our specific job, but about other roles within our organization, and that's what's going to enable us to become pros in process design. So I want to start out just by quickly talking about why process is important, and repeatability is the key word there. And you can see from the little image below, if you don't have a clearly defined process, you've just got a bunch of ad hoc activity. You've got people doing things the way they think they should be doing them, or the way they feel like doing them on any given day. And you can't measure that. You can't really baseline that. You can't say whether or not you've improved on that. So we start out putting processes in place so that we have a repeatable set of activities. Everybody understands what we need to do and how we need to do it in order to work as efficiently and effectively as possible. Now, let me talk about why processes aren't important. And those of you who know me, I'm a little bit of a process geek, so I say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek. But processes are only one little piece of the puzzle. To really put the puzzle together requires systems thinking. It requires understanding, and what system thinking really speaks to is the fact that you have to understand that anytime you change one component of a greater system, you affect and potentially negatively impact other components within that system. We could think of IT service management as a system. We can think about the service lifecycle as a system. So IT service management, by definition, is an integrated process approach that enables organizations to deliver services that meet business and customer requirements. It's a system, right? It's an integrated set of processes. No one process stands alone, and you can't change one process on its own without impacting other processes. To further thicken the plot, ITSM processes are part of a greater value stream. So if you look at an organization, what an organization strives to do is take a customer request, to push that request through its processes, adding value, ensuring every process adds value along the way, and then delivers goods or services to their customers in a form that their customers view as valuable. Value is defined by our customers and not by us in IT, or not by folks in any other part of an organization. If you think about IT as the IT value stream, we have, and these are kind of mirrored in the service lifecycle, we have some really key activities. They include activities like how we take an overall business strategy and translate that into services that we have in our portfolio. So here's where processes like business relationship management and demand management, right? Those processes that are really a critical part of service strategy come into play. From taking requirements for our IT services and building and developing and deploying and releasing them into our production environment, right? Taking requests, and a lot of you, this is perhaps what you do. You take request for service, you take provisioning requests, you take access requests, you take technology requests, right? Somebody needs a new laptop. So from taking a request for a standard service of some kind to fulfilling that request, and then of course, the process of taking defects, and I've kindly put defects in quotes there just to speak to the fact that, you know, we'll use terms like defects, we'll use terms like incidents, we'll use terms like problems. They all at their kind of essence are defects. Taking defects and then correcting those defects to the satisfaction of our customers. So all of these processes, and we focus on IT service management processes here at the Academy, are really part of this greater IT value stream. There's lots of methodologies and frameworks that can help us make sense of this value stream and help us make sense of these processes. We're all familiar with the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act, and really total quality management. Continuous service improvement serves as the foundation for any kind of process-related initiative. Some of you may be required to comply with standards. So in the case of IT service management, ISO 20000 is the international standard. And then most of us, I think, are familiar with frameworks like ITIL and perhaps COBIT, knowledge-centered support. All of these help us to better understand our IT service management processes. But here's where we have to come back to that concept of the greater value stream. Let's keep in mind that in other parts of the organization, they look at different methodologies and they use different frameworks. So we have the service design or the software design lifecycle, sometimes called the system design lifecycle. And there's different approaches to managing that lifecycle. There's traditional waterfall project management methodologies. There's agile project management methodologies. But it's really important to understand that these don't stand alone, right? We know this. All of these activities, let me break it down to the activity level, span the entire IT lifecycle. And we have to work well together. We run into problems when, and I always like to say that silos in an organization aren't inherently bad. It's when organizations don't have processes in place that lay comfortably over top of those silos, enabling the folks within silos to work well and efficiently together, that we start to run into trouble. So part of what we all have to do in IT today is gain a better understanding and have a little empathy for what's happening in other parts of the organization. If you're in ops, you need to better understand what's happening in dev, what's happening in QA. If you're in dev, you need to better understand what's happening in ops, maybe what's happening in information security, so that we can start to collaborate together in order to have processes that enable us to work efficiently and effectively. Overlaying all of this is an understanding that today we all need to learn to be more agile. And sometimes when we use the term agile, we're talking about agile methodologies like Scrum, but agile is also just a general concept, right? Learning to work more quickly, learning to work in a more coordinated fashion, right? And being able to kind of together quickly respond to business requirements. Lean certainly comes into play in terms of us helping us to optimize flow in order to reduce waste in our processes. And DevOps comes into play. And DevOps really kind of pulls from all of these methodologies. It embraces agile practices, lean practices, IT service management practices. It doesn't stand alone. It cannot stand alone. But I do think it's really important to understand that DevOps is very much a different way of working. And if we can really understand what the promise of DevOps is, and not even so much what the core practices of are, but what the principles behind those practices are, I think we'll all be better off. Anyone who is introducing IT service management processes today, you have a responsibility to understand DevOps, even if you're not introducing DevOps into your organization, because it is a different way of working and it's a different way of thinking, and it will fundamentally change the way you introduce IT service management processes in your organization, and that's a good thing. So a lot of times when we're talking methodologies and frameworks, we hear this term best practices. ITIL is a set of best practices, but really what best practice is to choose the method or the hybrid of methods that are going to serve the needs of your organization and then adapt them. And adapt them to your organization's current circumstances, current needs, and current goals. And those are going to change over time. So hopefully the message that you're going to take away from this is that because circumstances, needs, and goals are always changing, our processes always need to be changing. Our value streams always need to be changing. But one of the things that we can do, and one of the reasons why it's always beneficial to adopt a methodology or a framework, is that it gives you a shared vocabulary. What we do have to do a better job of, I believe, in IT is have that shared vocabulary span the entire IT value stream. So rather than having dev with their vocabulary where they're talking about increments and sprints and product backlogs, and we're over here on the IT service management side talking about our IT service management tools and our incidents and our problems, we need to establish a shared vocabulary, and we need to understand that in many cases we're saying the same things, we're just using different vocabulary. So let's not necessarily even care what we call it anymore. Let's just call it the same thing. That's what's really important. So by definition, a process is an integrated set of activities. Here's the two things I want to focus on here today. That a process defines what to do. There's nowhere in a process where we define how to do things. So we define what we need to do in order to satisfy our customers' requirements. Those are really two critical parts of understanding what processes are all about. And it's important to understand who all of your processes, or excuse me, who all of your customers are. And understand that those customers may have very different needs. An internal customer of your company may feel very differently than an external customer of your company. And when we're talking about technology today, when we're talking about our company's website, when we're talking about our company's mobile applications, we do need to understand that IT has both internal and external customers, and we really have to understand what they value, what they require, and what they view as satisfaction of those requirements. It's down here at the procedural level where we start talking about how. And I sometimes hear organizations talking about having multiple change management processes or multiple incident management processes. You don't need multiple processes. What you need is a process that kind of clearly defines at a very high level what we need to do, what the ultimate outcomes of that process are in order to satisfy the customers of that process, all the customers of that process. And then you need to leave the procedural aspects of things to the teams. Let the teams determine how they're going to execute that process. As long as they're delivering the desired outcome, as long as they're meeting agreed upon performance goals, how they go about doing that isn't as much of a concern. And that's how you can really kind of move more quickly with your process design and improvement activities. If you don't try to get down to the detailed procedural level, if you sit at a much higher level, you're going to get agreement more quickly. You're going to get a shared understanding of what that process needs to do. If you try to start fighting battles down at the procedural level, you're going to be there for a long time. So it's important to understand that every process is perfectly designed to get the outcome it gets. Some of you may have heard me say before, if your processes are bureaucratic, it's because you made it that way. So what's really important is to understand your customers' requirements. If you don't understand those requirements, it's likely your customers are going to be dissatisfied with your process, and they're going to go around it. They're going to, complain about it. They're going to find alternative ways of getting what they need without following a process. So if we always keep that in mind, that processes define what to do, they don't define how to do it, then hopefully we can get much more comfortable with the notion of separating the what from the how. So I want to give you some examples. And one of the questions we get asked a lot is, how are organizations adapting their IT service management processes in support of DevOps? So I want to give you some really specific examples here. Now, with these examples, please, if your organization isn't in the process of introducing DevOps, these are still great ideas. They're still great approaches that you can take in order to improve the flow and kind of deliver more quickly and with higher levels of quality on your processes. So with traditional IT service management, a change is requested. Typically that change is, completed by creating a request for change in your IT service management tool, whether it's, ServiceNow or Remedy, whatever your tool of choice is. We create this record. A lot of times it has a whole bunch of fields that you have to fill out relative to that change. In many organizations, the CAB has to then approve that change. If not before it can go forward, at least before it can move into the final stages of the production environment. With DevOps, and I want to talk about DevOps and Agile for a second. With DevOps, here's what's really different. With DevOps, we're talking about very small, very incremental changes. A lot of times we're talking about one line of code that is being changed. So the promise of DevOps is that by minimizing the size of changes, by making smaller batches of changes rather than having the traditional big mama application change that happens once a quarter that represents thousands and thousands of changes, we're making very small changes. And with DevOps, there's continuous testing going on. There's a shift left premise that comes into play here where we're capturing quality at the source. And by the time that change gets even close to the production environment, it's been tested and tested again in a production-like environment. And there's a high degree of confidence that that change is going to go into the production environment without causing any kind of impact to the environment. So what we're seeing with DevOps is that they're bypassing that request for change step. The change got requested because it was a backlog item was created, that item was pulled from the backlog and a development team started work on it. But what has to happen is that the change has to be recorded. And if you do have a CAB in your organization and perhaps don't have the notion of standard changes in place, and a standard change by definition is a pre-approved change, the CAB doesn't necessarily worry about that change, the CAB is notified, and this can happen automatically. Another example is traditional incident management where a call comes into the service desk, that incident gets logged, it gets escalated, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and the appropriate team is responsible for resolving that incident. With DevOps, there's very much a swarming philosophy where when a change is made, and one of the things you need to understand about DevOps is as that change is making its way through the pipeline, it's being monitored, people know what's changing, they know when it's changing. They're very quickly, through their monitoring tools, they're very quickly able to understand if something is going wrong, and they either roll back that change, or if the decision is made to try to fix it, then they use something like ChatOps to swarm the incident, bring all the teams together that could potentially assist in resolving this particular incident, and they're using chat technology. So a record is being made of all that correspondence, of everything that's happening related to that particular incident. Another example, and this is kind of an age-old argument with Dev and Ops. The Dev people have their bug tracking system. So for a lot of you, it might be something like Jira. And the Ops side of the house has their incident and problem management system. So again, this is your ServiceNow tool, this is your Remedy tool that you're using. And these two don't talk to each other. And in fact, they're viewed almost philosophically different. With the defect tracking tools, the Dev folks very much understand that they have to fix bugs during the development lifecycle. And that's part of their normal work, handling those defects and managing those defects. Because incident problems are often handled in a different system, in a different non-integrated set of processes, Dev very often views things like incident problems as something that's just getting in the way of them doing their work. So what we see with DevOps is organizations that are either integrating those systems, where maybe you share a tool, or if nothing else, creating at a procedural level how we're going to integrate those processes. So some examples might include organizations who have where Dev and Ops, as part of their daily stand-ups, or perhaps as part of a meeting outside of their daily stand-up, they talk about outstanding incidents and problems, and where it's appropriate, that incident or problem then gets captured in the product backlog, and then it starts to now be prioritized and handled as a part of the normal work that the development team is doing. I've heard of some organizations who have problems recorded as defects in the defect tracking system. So if we have something that rises to a level of a problem from an IT service management standpoint, then we're going to handle that via the defect tracking system. Same philosophy, that we're going to let development handle that as part of their normal workflow, and not try to make them handle two different sets of activities. Hopefully it makes sense. That's kind of what we're asking them to do. We're asking them to do their defect tracking stuff, and oh, by the way, come over here and learn all this IT service management stuff. Maybe they don't have to learn all the IT service management stuff. Maybe we just need to understand what the role of the product backlog and the role of the defect tracking system, and integrate those processes and those tools. Now, those are just examples, but I hope that what you're taking away from these examples is the fact that the fundamental outcomes haven't changed. We still have to record changes. We still have to record incidents and problems. We still have to make sure that incidents and problems are being handled in a timely manner. What we're doing is rethinking the how part of what we're doing. We're not necessarily, right, changing the process. The process hasn't changed. Change management, the goal of change management will forever be to minimize the risk or mitigate the risk and impact associated with making changes. The goal of incident management will always be to restore productivity to people who are being impacted by changes. The goal of problem management will always be, as an example, to get to the root cause and eliminate that root cause. So the fundamental outcomes aren't different. It's the how part that's very, very different. So it's important to understand that a lot of times when we talk about process improvement, and I know in IT organizations always, we're being challenged to reduce our cost associated with the things that we're doing. We're being challenged to speed up, but those things don't have to happen in isolation. In the goal, we talk about the fact that the goal is to not only reduce operational expenses, but also to reduce inventory, what we call work in progress a lot of times in IT, and increase that throughput simultaneously, achieve those goals simultaneously. So how do we do that? One of the things that we have to do is we have to take a top-down approach. We have to understand that the policies you have in place within your organization today are dictating what your processes look like. And for some of you, if you think about it for a minute, those policies might have been put in place a long time ago. And those policies really may not accurately reflect your current circumstances, your current needs, your current goals. So let's take a look at our policies that we have in place and give some thought to, do we in fact have in place policies that just enable a shared understanding of what the intent of these processes is all about? I like to call them guardrails, right? Give people, part of this new way of working today is about improving the trust within an organization, empowering people to create and innovate. but you can't let everybody do their own thing, right? You won't be successful that way either. So what are the guardrails? What are the minimum things that we need to do? And let me tie it back to the previous conversation. What's the what, right? What are the core things we all have to understand are important here and have that shared understanding, as opposed to having policies in place that are true constraints within your organization. One of the reasons why there's this age-old adversarial relationship between dev and ops is that some IT service management processes are overly bureaucratic. There are controls in place for the sake of controls, or there are controls in place that reflected some other day and time in our environment, and they're not really relevant anymore, but they're still hanging around and they're still influencing the way we do things. So we want to take a look at, and here's where, part of what the goal is all about is understanding what our constraints are within our processes. And in the case where where the policies are the constraint, then let's think about revisiting those policies so that we can enable process improvement to occur and have those processes in the end reflect our current circumstances, needs, and goals, and not, the way we've always done things. If you don't change your policies, then you need to understand that you're not going to see a transformation. You're not going to see, you're not going to be able to achieve the goals of reengineering or completely rethinking a process, because your policies are always going to drive you back to the way you've always done things. In the goal, Donna, who's kind of one of the key characters in the book, is talking about making changes within the manufacturing environment of the company that's discussed in the goal. And at one point he says, why would you not make that change when it's as simple as changing a policy? And I thought that was such a profound statement, because it reminds us that, a lot of times when we talk about changing processes, then we start going down the path of changing tools or buying new tools, and then we start, creating all these costs associated with making those changes. But changing policies, right, is really, I know it's easier said than done, but it's a simple decision that can be made that can really enable us to move forward in a meaningful way. There's also a lot of approaches that we can use in order to design and improve processes. Some of you out there, I know, are certified process design engineers. I see some familiar names out there. What CPD teaches us is the 10 steps of process design and improvement. And I think it's always important to keep in mind that the 10 steps start with understanding of what are those requirements. Let's make sure that we are clear about what our customer requirements are, so that as we move forward making changes to our processes, we're satisfying those requirements, as opposed to potentially making the process worse because we're not listening to our customers. We can also leverage Agile service management techniques, and Agile service management is really about adapting Agile and specifically Scrum practices to process design and improvement activities. In other words, chunking up your process design and improvement initiatives and making smaller, more incremental changes. The benefit of doing that is it helps reduce the fatigue that can come when you're making constant process improvements. It enables people to kind of better understand the changes that you're making, and it also gives you faster feedback, right? Make a small change, analyze the results of that change, and then build on that change going forward. You can also leverage lean techniques. So hopefully some of you are familiar with value stream mapping. If you're not, a little bit of a homework assignment is to get out there and learn more about value stream mapping. A lot of what value stream mapping helps us, a benefit of the visual of value stream mapping, is it helps us understand that we have to figure out what's often called the white space between activities, right? And a lot of times this is where the handoffs are happening. This is where there's going to be wait time as we make our way through our process. And what value stream mapping does is challenge us to think about things from a time perspective and actually quantify these activities. And it's very much easier, or it's one of those things that's easier said than done, but it requires a commitment. It requires people to be willing to track their time. And usually what happens is for a period of time, right? You say that we're gonna kind of track time. You don't turn this into something, a new full-time job for folks, but actually track how long it's taking to do things and really quantify your activities. When you talk about trying to optimize flow across a value stream, time is one of the most beneficial things that you can talk about. A lot of times we talk about cost reduction, but if you really understand and start learning to think about time, you're gonna reduce cost. If you reduce the time it takes to do things, you're gonna reduce cost. You're gonna improve productivity because you're gonna enable people to work at a sustainable pace. A lot of times what happens in IT when we don't have a flow across our processes is that there's feast or famine situations where all of a sudden you're super, super busy and you got to go to heroic efforts in order to kind of complete some body of work, or maybe you're starved for work. You're waiting for somebody upstream to pass work to you. You know it's coming to you. You're like afraid of it because you know how tough it's going to be once it gets to you, but you're sitting there waiting on it. So if we can all be working at a sustainable pace, we'll improve productivity. And it also increases quality when we're able to shrink the time that we're spending working on these processes. And the biggest reason is because we get fast feedback. Processes are closed loop. They give us feedback from our customers. Did we, in fact, satisfy your requirements? And if we didn't, what are we going to do about it? And if we're really listening to our customers, and if we're constantly trying to improve our processes based on that feedback, we're going to improve the overall quality. And if we're doing that iteratively and incrementally, we can improve it much more quickly. One of the other things that you can do is experiment. And experimentation is a concept that's kind of very familiar to folks who are involved in software development, but it's not necessarily something that we think about too much in the context of IT service management, but it doesn't have to be. Some of these changes that organizations are making in order to introduce DevOps are perfect examples of experiments. So rather than scaring everybody by telling everybody, okay, we're going to completely redesign this process, and we're going to now all start doing this way. Take on a pilot project, baseline your performance. You have to be able to articulate the time it's taking you to do things the way you're doing them now. Observe that challenge area, and you can use practices like the theory of constraint in order to figure out, okay, where's the real bottleneck, where's the real problem area that we need to focus in on, and then design and conduct an experiment. And I could spend a whole half hour talking about how to run an experiment. We actually, in the new ITIL practitioner course, have a little section where we talk about experiments. But design and conduct an experiment and then analyze the results, right? And it's really important to understand that if you haven't baselined your performance, you're not going to be able to analyze your results, right? You're not going to have anything to compare against. W. Edwards Deming says, without data, you're just another person with an opinion, right? So you've got to have baselined where, the process as it currently existed, and then look at the results and look at the outcomes. So it's not just about looking at data, but it also is looking at your customers. Are they satisfied? Did you meet their requirements? Some of your customers are going to be managers. Can they still get the information that they need in order to manage that process or oversee that process? So remember to always think about all of your customers, analyze those results, and then present a reasoned argument. And a reasoned argument is just the chain of credible evidence that supports an assertion or claim. So rather than just saying something like DevOps is awesome, it's going to enable us to go faster, let's talk about specifically what are the changes that we made, what was the performance of our process before we made that change, what is the performance of our process now that we've made that change, and now let's talk about that, right? So that we have, and we're talking about it with real time considerations in place, with real metric considerations in place. We're not using words like a lot and better. We're using, you know, we reduced the time it took us to handle that by X amount of time, or we increased, or we decreased, right? Based on what the goals were, or what the hypothesis was that we put in place for our experiment. Then, right, we can start talking about introducing that change and making that change in a broader scale across the organization. And that's going to require organizational change management. It really is always important to understand that the new ways of working that are being introduced today are very much assuming that we have new responsibilities. We've got to learn new skills. We have to behave in different ways. So a good organizational change management program is going to help prepare people for the change that's coming, help them understand why this change is occurring, make sure that there's that sense of urgency with regard to the need to change, to motivate people, to get people excited about the change, and then to give them those skills. It's really fundamentally unfair to ask people to change without giving them the skill set that they need in order to embrace the new way of working. Here's where education and training come into play. Education helps people understand the why. It helps them understand the bigger picture. It helps them think beyond their role. It helps them think, it helps them system think, right? It helps them understand that bigger perspective. And then training really has to do with their specific role and how they do their specific job. Here's where we're getting into the how part. So it's, again, that difference between what and how. So what are the lessons we've learned from watching organizations not only introduce IT service management programs, but now introduce DevOps initiatives? One of the biggest lessons learned is that you've got to always honor the past, but don't be bound by it. A lot of times I hear people say, we're going to stop doing IT service management and we're going to start doing DevOps. And what you're saying is we don't honor the past. We don't honor all the hard work, really hard work that went into introducing IT service management in our organization, and the reality that we're better today because of it. We are better. If we go back 5 years before we had IT service management, things were much more chaotic, and now we're much more efficient and we're much more effective. And we've got to honor that. You need to understand that anytime you don't honor the past, you're really running the risk of kind of hacking off a stakeholder, because somebody you're talking to perhaps was very, very involved in that process improvement initiative years ago, was very proud of their work, really sees that the organization benefited because of their work, and now you're dismissing it. Honor the past, but don't be bound by it. Accept your current reality. Sometimes with processes, we talk about, well, here's what you should be doing, but is that really what people are doing, right? So part of looking at it as is process is really understanding the current reality, what people are actually doing today, not what on paper somebody says they should be doing. Accept current reality. Understand that local optimization can cause global degradation. Hopefully DevOps has taught us that. Dev people were introducing Agile development practices. They were getting better at what they were doing, but they weren't working with ops, right? In order to enable ops to be prepared to receive a higher rate of changes coming their way much more quickly. Same thing, you know, ops has been making IT service management improvements that maybe have been helping them, but have perhaps been negatively impacting ops. If you're doing things wrong and you automate them, you'll do them wrong faster. Y'all have heard me say that before. Processes come first. We have to make sure that we understand our processes before we start automating things. And one of the key points I want to make about automation is when you automate things, you give people permission not to think about them anymore. Hopefully, and that makes sense to everybody. I used to say this about defaulting data fields all the time. I see organizations default data fields in their incident management system or whatever, as soon as you default a data field, you give people permission not to think about it anymore. And if you don't want people to correct that data value if it's wrong, why did you default it to begin with? Hopefully that makes sense. But it's the same thing with workflow, right? If you automate workflow, people become firmly convinced that that's the way we do things, and they don't think about it anymore. And a big lesson is that you must always make changes with people and for people and not to people. The biggest mistake we can make with process design and improvement is have a small team of people go into a room together, come out, and hand everybody some new way of working without engaging them, without, as we say in Lean, going to Gemba, without going to where people are doing the work and making sure that we understand how that work is being done, why the work is being done the way it is, asking questions, being respectful. It's the fastest way in order to get people to kind of reject the new way of working. So when we talk about IT service management, when we talk about DevOps, this is culture change. It really is a transformation in the way that we work. And any true transformation is going to involve structural change. That might mean a reorganization, moving to self-directed teams, moving to product-oriented teams, rethinking the silos that you have within your organization, people-oriented and process-oriented changes. And it's important to understand that process changes are really the DNA of the transformation because they influence people's behaviors, and culture really is a reflection of how people behave in an organization. So if we keep in mind what we ultimately want to do today, and that is optimize the flow of work across the entire IT value stream, not within different silos within the organization, but across the entire organization, and that requires collaboration, right, in order to optimize that flow of work. Then we can start to think about how and when to embed automation into that process. And it's important to understand that a key aim of automation is to free up capacity. A lot of folks today are very, very concerned about automation. They think they're going to get automated out of a job. But what automation should always do is free people up from doing the mundane stuff, the repeatable stuff, the easy stuff, and enable them to work on more creative things and more innovative things, on the forward-looking future things that are really needed in order to enable your organization to be competitive. So I love this Deming quote, and I just want to say for the folks who are playing the Donna said Deming's game, thank you, or you're welcome. I'm sure you're out there thanking me. Deming actually said, and you have to remember, you know, we're talking, what, 75 years ago now? The transformation can only be accomplished by man, and I always like to add, and women, not by hardware, computers, gadgets, automation, new machinery, right? So it's human beings who have to go through and think about and use care transforming an organization. You can't just install technology and think you're going to be successful. So what's a process design pro? A process design pro is somebody who really, first of all, understands what a process is versus a procedure, right? And that's kind of a fundamental distinction, but it is important to understand. And the role those processes play within a greater value stream. So get out of just your individual process, get up to the value stream level and understand, right, that greater system. Systems thinking is such a critical part of IT service management and understanding and helping IT service management achieve its goals. Steal shamelessly from existing frameworks and standards, and that's not only IT service management framework and standards. I'm a certified Agile Scrum Master. I'm a certified Scrum Master for a reason, because Agile changed the way I think about how we can introduce IT service management in our organization. Learning about DevOps has changed the way I think about IT service management. So get out there and learn about and understand, and then kind of steal the essence from all of these different frameworks, and standards. Adapt them to meet your organization's circumstances, needs, and goals. There is a method to process design and improvement, the 10 process design and improvement steps, Agile service management techniques. So a process design pro is an expert in process design and improvement, understands that there's a process for process design and improvement, right? And is an organizational change management, really understands the people aspects of things and cares about the impact of making changes on people and works to make changes with people and for people and not to people. And kind of a bonus, right, fifth option. A process design pro knows how to optimize flow, right? And that's going to require higher level value stream thinking, not only individual process level thinking. Conduct and learn from experiments and that notion of present a reasoned argument. Don't be surprised if a future webinar isn't on how to present a reasoned argument, because it's something I love talking about. And hopefully one of the things you took away from this webinar is that presenting a reasoned argument is really about having the data, right? Being able to quantify what you're saying and not just, right, have an opinion on how you think something is going to be better.
And I'd like to introduce my colleague, Eric Montijo. Eric, are you here with us?
I sure am. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Eric.
Hi. And Donna, awesome webinar today. Thank you for joining us. I love the 5 key takeaways, and I think those are going to be really good for everybody watching today. So there were a couple of things that I wanted to make sure everybody knew about, and there's 2 main classes that I think kind of tie into what you were talking about today. And you've actually got the slide up that has 2 of both the classes I was going to talk about. So maybe you can talk about it a little bit more. CPDE and CAPO specifically deal with process, and can you dive a little bit more into how those classes would benefit somebody that was really interested in what you talked about today?
Sure. So CPDE is really the primer, I like to say, on process design and improvement. It's where we introduce the 10 steps of process design and improvement. We introduced proven techniques that you can use to do things like facilitate workshops and report on the performance of your processes. We talk about organizational change management in that course. There's a whole entire section on managing the change associated with process design and improvement. So it's really, and you actually saw, you know, examples from CPDE in this particular webinar, taking that top-down approach, the 10 steps you saw earlier. Certified Agile Service Manager and CAPO across the bottom are really 2 roles that are associated with Agile Service Management. And what Agile Service Management does is adapt Scrum practices to process design and improvement. So while CPD looks at an individual process and how to work through designing or improving an individual process, Agile Service Management as a technique says, here's how to take an incremental and iterative approach to designing and improve your processes. If you're familiar at all with Agile or Scrum, there's 2 primary roles, one of which is the product owner role. The Certified Agile Process Owner is analogous to the product owner role. So the Certified Agile Process Owner owns the process backlog, which is all the requirements, all the customer requirements that are associated with that particular process, and is really responsible for making sure that that process delivers value. So a lot of what I talked about today are the different practices, the lessons learned, the techniques that you can use are really important for a process owner, because a lot of times it is the process owner, or always it should be the process owner, who's driving that process improvement. The Certified Agile Service Manager role is analogous to the Scrum Master role. So they help everybody understand Agile Service Management. They help everybody understand what it means to take an iterative and incremental approach, how to run process improvement sprints. And you know, their role is to help the team work more efficiently and effectively in an Agile service management approach. While I've got the screen, I'm going to mention that you can see what part of what this slide talks about is that the whole what to do is what we can learn in our ITIL classes, whether it be an ITIL foundation class or the ITIL intermediate classes in a DevOps foundation class. You really learn what those frameworks are all about. The process design and improvement roles then help you to execute on the how to do things, whether it's how to do process design and improvement or how to use Agile service management practices. Let me go and I'll just mention that we have a similar approach with DevOps. So there's a DevOps foundation class where you can learn what DevOps is. And then there's the DevOps practitioner series of courses where you can learn the how to do things. So how to put in place continuous testing in your organization, how to be a DevOps leader and lead that transformation. This is actually what Mustafa is going to talk about next month at our webinar next month. You'll see within our portfolio that we have that what and how represented in our classes. So, sorry, Eric, if I ran a little long there.
No, that's great. You gave a lot more information than I could have, and a lot more articulately than I could have. So I appreciate that. Okay, so I'll use my projective voice. The CPDE class coming up is going to be October 16th to the 20th. That class can be found on itsmacademy.com/CPDE, and the Capo class is going to be coming up September 12th. So both of those are going to be in the fall. We still have seats available, but they are filling up quickly. If you're interested, please send an email out to info@itsmacademy.com. Give us a call at 954-491-3442, or go ahead and just chat us on our website, itsmacademy.com. We're happy to help you out anytime. And I will get off of my soapbox and I will hand this back for Q&A to Donna and Karen. Thank you, ladies.